everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5-Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Good evening, Rush Nation. We are back. It is the 1st of May, which means the NFL draft is well and truly in the rearview window. The fixtures will be out soon. The players will be heading to rookie training camp. It feels like the start of like almost the NFL season in a lot of ways. I know it's a long way to go, but with rookie drafts and we now know what teams are going to look like for the year. It's all full court press as we get ready for this. And with me, as always, is my illustrious co-host, Danny. Danny, how the devil are you this week?
Yeah, all good. It's nice to get to the long bank holiday weekend and have a few days off. So, yeah, I'm very happy today.
Absolutely. I think that's, a really key one for sure, having that having the bank holiday weekend, having a good old relax and making the most of it. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. And with us, we've got an amazing guest, the executive producer of Rotoviz Radio and the host of Rotoviz Overtime. He's also the first person to take the Emerald Isle by storm since Bono, or take the America by storm from the Emerald Isle since Bono botched that. But anyway, Colm Kelly, welcome to the show, my man. How the devil are you?
Hey guys, how are we doing? I'm looking forward to this. I'm a big U2 fan as well, so it does fit in. But I can't say.
I just had to not botch it.
We can edit that out in post-production. Oh no, it's live. We're live, guys. We can't go back. But it's going to be fun here to talk through some of the rookies, the draft stuff, and obviously we're a week kind of removed from it. So you mentioned the season and getting closer, but it really is a 365-day season for the NFL, and it never really stops. There's always going to be something to look ahead to. So we have another piece of the puzzle as we count down to September.
Yeah, we really
also
do.
Getting in trouble as well. So you're just going to say, also getting in trouble because my phone keeps beeping every 2 seconds with rookie drafts, and my wife's staring at me like, "What are you trying to watch something on TV at 9 o'clock at night?" And my phone keeps beeping. It's my turn to pick and stuff.
At this point, outside of phone calls, everything else on my phone is on mute. And the only reason phone calls aren't on mute is in case my wife needs to get through to me. It used to be a case that, if you were like doing Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, you have one call to get the prize. I was definitely not the person to call. I've bumped up in the list a little bit now, but yeah, I have everything on mute, but I just have a problem that I continuously check to see if I have notifications on my phone.
I'm just saying, I haven't turned the ringer on in my phone in 7 years.
That's
so my phone
that's probably would have been like, yeah.
Yeah, my phone never makes a noise. So it's just, if you ring me, like, because I've got my watch, so I'll know if it's ringing. And it's like, that's it. So if I put it in do not disturb mode, or if I'm not wearing my watch, then like for pods, I try not to wear it too much, because otherwise it just pings and I get distracted, especially like my line of work and everything. So it gets crazy. So anyway, Colm, before we get into like the agenda, for folks who know you or don't know you, why don't you talk a little bit about your route to fantasy, getting to Rotoviz, how you got into it from Ireland, and just a key intro. I know the backstory, but good to hear from everybody else. What you're passionate about fantasy football, how you've ended up where you are, and landing, keeping the trains running and representing the Emerald Isle for fantasy football as well.
You've really put me on the spot, because this is like every so often somebody says, I'm going to ask you this question. You kind of try and remember it, but it is now. I've been doing NFL related podcast since 2013. So I was about to say for a decade, but that now is 13 years. So you start to feel, you feel your age at that point. Started off doing podcasts just about American football, which would have been, I would be afraid to go back and listen to them now. They would not have been good. Recorded on all sorts of like recording devices and, trying to work with the technology that I had. But I was very fortunate, and we can be very critical of social media now. And I would be personally critical of it as well, but I do use it for like sports and communicating. Like the reason I know you guys is through social media and, building up a background with a lot of people. But back in like 2013 through 2016, 2017, like the fantasy community on Twitter in particular was an actual thing. And I was fortunate enough at that time to get to know a lot of people around the community that were based in the States, but you could do that being in Ireland. And I was lucky enough at the time to have a lot of guys come on as guests on my shows at the time and build up a rapport. And then that kind of led to getting to know quite a number of the guys at Rotoviz. And eventually then, I started editing some of their shows and doing my own shows. But I do my show now, Rotoviz Overtime, with Sean Siegel. And that just came because he was a guest with me on, at the time, was the Overtime Ireland podcast. And we really hit it off, and kind of we decided we'd like to do a podcast together, and it led into that and kind of just grew from there. And I've been lucky with the kind of people that I've known over the years to, kind of do some of the production on their shows. People might know like Pat Fitzmaurice, he had Fitz on Fantasy. I did all the production on all of his shows. And that was just, again, he was on my show at the time. I'm a Packers fan. He's a Packers fan. For whatever reason, we kind of struck off a really strong relationship. And that has been the case, currently I do some of the work on Pat Curran's channel, Legendary Upside. So there's like things like that. And I've kind of gone in and out through different podcasts now, but Rotoviz is my main thing. And that's where I've been fortunate enough to go from having, an interest in it to becoming almost addicted to it. And like, I got into it because podcasts really exploded at that time. You could get all the information. There was more coverage. I got more into it. But eventually then it just became my kind of career path. And I've been very fortunate to be able to do that because, again, if you had told me 10 years ago that you're based in Ireland and you could like do something like that based on a sport in the US, I just wouldn't have believed it. So very fortunate. And thankfully now do all the back end Rotoviz stuff. Stealing Bananas is a big podcast that Sean and Ben do that has a large following. So kind of operate a lot of that stuff in the background for those guys as well. So, and then of course we have the whole Rotoviz website, which I'm sure I'll talk about at some point, but a lot of kind of analytical and kind of data driven stuff, particularly around player profiles.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I first came to hear of you through Fitz on Fantasy, and then obviously he moved over to Fantasy Pros, and I was lucky enough to guest on his show and be on there, and many moons ago. And I completely agree with you about social media. It feels almost a shame now that I've been doing this show 9 years, almost 10 years.
Yeah, so a lot of that time. Like it sounds weird, and it always felt cliche to say like the fantasy community, but it really at that time was like, I think of like, Scott Fish and what Scott Fishbowl has become now, but even like 9-10 years ago, that was just a really key area, and people were kind of like trying to help each other up. If you look at a lot of the people that are in major positions around the industry now, even the like JJ Zachariason, there's like so many of the guys that are over like at Establish the Run. There was a real like push to help people. Like I mentioned, I got the opportunity at Rotoviz, but Matthew Friedman was at Rotoviz at the time, and he was running the podcast side of it, and he was kind of like, he was working on something else. Do you want to dive in at the deep end and try run this here? And that's kind of how I got that opportunity. And it was kind of like people weren't afraid to be like, I'm going to give you a leg up, if that makes sense. I'm going to give 100%. You this opportunity. Whereas now it does feel, and the problem is that social media rewards it. Like if you can gain points by knocking somebody else down, you might get yourself up. And that's why I kind of sometimes I'll post when we do shows and that, but I don't engage a lot on the front end face of social media because it's not worth it, I don't think.
I've also really struggled with that massively over the last sort of 3 or 4 years, probably. And then the thing is, as well, is I don't actually think it's the people that are hosting shows, doing shows that are preventing the opportunities and not wanting to give a leg up anymore. I think a lot of it is the toxicity of comment on live streams. I think to every time I've been on the Fantasy Pros live stream, which has probably been nearly half a dozen times, and you go and read the comments whenever you get a woman on, or someone like myself, Tom Strachan,
anyone that's not American. We're not going to get into American. We're not going to get into dividing. We'll try and bring people together. Not. But I do agree. Like on our YouTube channel, there's some comments. There was one last week which I was telling somebody about yesterday. Which now at this point I'm strong-skinned enough to like have a laugh at, but it's like, you'll get the comment like, I can't listen to somebody from Europe talking about, like, in capital letters, American football. But that's just like, if people want to do that sort of stuff, like, do it. There's more to that than giving out about what we're saying on a podcast. So
100%.
But that's what social media is. It's the same. Me and you are massive Arsenal fans, and there's us wanting to be like, we just want to win the Premier League, so to know how it feels. But everyone else on the opposite side of the divide is ready to say, you messed up again. Look, I'm pointing my finger at you. You've messed up again. Like, and that's just the way. That's what's rewarded, and that's how, unfortunately, it has kind of gone. I don't know if we'll ever get that toothpaste back in the tube.
I don't. And I really think it's a different era now. And I kind of feel sad for those that are getting into the content space now, because I actually think it's probably 20 times harder.
I don't think you could. I think if I was doing what I did in like 2013, 2014, 2015, it would get torn apart, and it wouldn't be good enough, because you also didn't, like, we're lucky with technology. We have things like we're doing this on StreamYard, and that's what we use as well for our stuff. And I have a microphone here. We have different devices. We have better internet. Like, most of the podcasts I done in the early days, it was done through like a Skype recorder. So like there's no video. You're kind of, are you finished talking? Am I talking? Is their internet gone down? Are they there? It starts to go like robotic. So there's all that sort of. So it would have been torn apart for being not good enough, and then your confidence would have went to zip, and then you would have stopped, and you also probably just wouldn't have been able to like work together to get the opportunities, because I think part of it might be now that there's more voices in that area, so there's more accounts. It's like there's more online, so there's more accounts, so then it kind of limits the ability to create those true connections, because most of the people that I'm very close to in the fantasy space are the same people that I would have been close with in like 2016, 2017. It's like there's new people that come in as well, but you see a lot of new people come in. They might have success for a year or two, but like they go again. And I guess that's where either they get burned out, or you don't really have the passion to want to be in that area. There's either option.
Yeah, and I think it's really hard. And my advice to any sort of content creator is I at one point got too obsessed with the numbers doing this show, and we tried to do too much and bit off more than we could chew, and spiraled off to loads of like offshoot podcasts and lots of things and all this sort of stuff. And it was just like, do you know what? That's kind of, you're in the space now where you got to find your area that you're happy with. You got to find the content that you enjoy doing and talking about the areas you like talking about, because it's not a grind if you enjoy it, but it's a grind to do all the other bits that go along the creating of the content.
And there's even things like we now do 2 shows every week, and it's very rare that we would ever miss a week ever. Like, we're up now, I think we're like nearly 1,000 shows of the Rotoviz Overtime podcast. But like when we were doing that, it started off as 1 show a week, then we went to 2, but then we went to 3. It was Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays. And then like my co-host in that was based in Arizona, Sean Siegel, and there was an 8-hour time difference. So there's like the pressure of like, can we fit it into a recording schedule? And it got to the point at the 3 where we're like, let's just go back to 2. And now a lot of the time we pretty much record 2 shows back to back and release them on Monday and Wednesday. But then you have to want to like prepare that we have shows that can come out 3 days later that won't be completely out of date. Like, you should plan the things out just and do it that way. But when we got to them 3 shows, we kind of had that option. If you keep doing 3, you're going to do this for another 6 months. If you go down to 2, you can do it for another 6 years. You kind of have to just find that part, and that can be very hard.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think it's really interesting. And I think when you go through the stories and you hear how people got into it, I always get more fascinated how people over the last 2 or 3 years got into it and their reasons for it, because it's very different from if you talk about, you use the words like community and being part of something. And I think when you and you before me, but when, we sort of got into this space, it was very much community was at the heart of it, that you would talk to people. And it was a way of, you didn't know a lot of people that enjoyed the thing that you did. And therefore you were reaching out, you were trying to find people that had similar interests to you. And the game has exploded so much, especially this side of
Well,
Europe.
you think like when we're talking about in those times, like there was barely games in the UK. Like
won a game, won a series. That was.
And I'm even thinking in my head now, like some of the people that I would talk about that came on my show or that were guests. You know, at that time they might have had like 15,000 followers on Twitter. So you might send them a DM and then they're like, oh, look, and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe they're coming on. Yeah. But now I don't do it, but like I had somebody on, Scott Barrett was on with us talking pre-draft stuff a couple of weeks ago. And I think he's like over 100,000 followers. You know, like I can't even fathom that. But like, you know, if you're only starting now, it's very hard to send a message to that person or else it's got to, the other thing we have to remember is, back then, there might have been, like, if I was an Irish podcast or if you're a European podcast, I know there was only one Irish one when I started, and there wasn't, like, there was a couple of UK ones. But when we look now, there's just so many podcasts about everything. And, like, that means that if somebody was willing to go on, like, a couple of podcasts a year, your chances of getting those guys. Like I remember guys like Adam Rank came on the podcast when I started out, or Jeff Reinbold used to come on regularly, like at the very, very start when you're like, this guy's on Sky Sports. What is he doing with me? And I'm recording. I recorded shows with Jeff where, you know, I'd record them on I'd be on my computer, but I didn't have a recorder on the computer. So I was using like, you know, a handheld recorder, and like there was times in the shows like would get lost, like the files wouldn't work, and he would still come back on. And it's like, that's just like, that's why I mean community, like people were willing to just talk to people at that particular point in time.
Yeah, honestly, all those guys, amazing. I am actually in a WhatsApp Arsenal group with Adam Rank. I have to add you to it.
Let's go. Let's get it done.
It's quite funny.
Do it for the end of the season here.
I'm going to add you when we finish that. That's my action item. But let's talk about people. You know, I think
talk about stuff that people want to hear about.
Yeah, people want their fantasy like it's like, oh, who are these old relics, and talking about the history of like Twitter. Let's talk about let's just talk about the NFL draft. I think it's really interesting now when we're really looking at the NFL draft and thinking about the lens of it. And you know, we got not a great class. We got, it's, beat over the head with lots of different things. But I think this is going to be one of those classes that actually, when we come back and look at it in, say, 4 to 5 years' time, I actually think people are going to think more positively of it, because I actually think some of the talent will sort of rise up, but it will take some time. What do you think, Colm? Just on the surface of this class, and again, I always think that the quarterbacks kind of weight a class because of the importance of the position. But your initial thoughts on this and where you think it could be in a few years' time, and how people will feel towards it.
It's always hard to, in the moment, you know, people that give grades to a draft, and then you could look back at that grade in 4 years' time and is completely wrong, either in a negative or a positive way. The one part of this class is it was projected to be kind of a down year, and it kind of has turned out to be that way. But the part of that is then, even in the good years, you may have multiple picks in every single round, and you'll have many picks in all the rounds that at the NFL level bust in general. And that's nothing new. But this year it kind of felt like everyone just kind of expected all the players to bust all the way through the draft, and that won't be the case. If we look back, there's always players from those later rounds that have huge success. The likes of, let's say, a Puka Nacua. Now, he is going to be the outlier for just how much success he has had. We'll see some of these players step up, and when we look back in 2 or 3 years, maybe it won't be as bad as people are feeling now. If we end up that Mendoza is, a true starting quarterback for the Raiders, and he can help the players there, like a Brock Bowers or a Ashton Jeanty, to fulfill their true potential, then that is obviously ahead of Ty Simpson becomes a starting quarterback from the Rams and can show some, he has a very small sample size, and we might talk about him later, but from his college, some very high upside potential. And that obviously elevates the class. Of a couple of these wide receivers hit, it could be looked back favorably, but I do think it's still going to be overall the high end upside maybe not going to be there. But I do think there's still interesting players. And every year, even when people hype up a class, there will be players in the first and second round that I'll feel they're not my kind of, using a phrase from this side of the water, cup of tea. And, that's the same in every single class. And when you work through rounds 1, rounds 2, rounds 3, rounds 4 now gets a little bit tough in the Dynasty streets this year. But there is players where if you're positioned in the right areas, I think there's still opportunities.
Do you guys think that teams drafted differently this year as well? I haven't been through as many drafts as what you guys have, but it felt like beforehand people would be drafting for value, whereas this time they seemed like they were drafting for what they actually needed because they knew the depth of it wasn't that much, so get the positions that they needed. I don't know if you guys thought the same.
There's a combination, and part of this is also down to this year. Some of the teams that maybe have had a consistent issue on one side of the ball, or let's say we look at the Cleveland Browns and they're looking to, add some firepower to the receiver room. So they go back to back at receiver. The Jets take a tight end and a wide receiver. The Baltimore Ravens took 2 wide receivers kind of in relatively close range. Sometimes that will happen. Like even if we go back to last year, like the Texans took Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins, pretty close together. So it will happen sometimes. It's always interesting if you could go inside the war rooms and know for sure if it's just a case of sometimes that could be, we like these 2 players, and you'll know this when you're in a draft yourself. Let's say you're in a redraft league and you're picking in the middle of the round, and you're like in the second round, I'm interested in player X and player Y, and next thing player Y gets to you as well in the third round. You're like, well, I'll take it because you wanted both of them. And that could be similar for some of these teams when they look at the best player available. It could be those 2 wide receivers stand out. But I think there's a combination of sometimes organizations are well run and they make smart choices. Sometimes they're not as well run and they don't make smart choices. And often it can be a case that is not absolutely clear in the moment. And it does take that, bit of time to figure out if it's like the right move or not.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Long-time listeners of this podcast, people have been listening to the show for like 6+ years, will know the story. I had Michael Lombardi on talking about like what draft rooms are like, and very successful GM and the amount of picks that he made in his time. Talking to him around how teams set up for the NFL draft. And he talks about this idea of a vertical board and a horizontal board. So the vertical board is literally the list of best player available. If you were to rank 1 through 260 players in the draft, that's what they do. And then they rank them based on the horizontal board on needs. So here's all your leads, and then they start ranking them across from a vertical and horizontal perspective. And he says basically when it comes to the earlier rounds teams, and he said his teams would tend to look at what they need, and then they would compare to the best player available board. And what would tend to happen is you would find a player who just is too good to pass up regardless of what the need is. It's like this player has to be picked. I think in a draft like this, where you have a very talent deficient class in comparison to previous classes, it's very difficult to make that stack up case for best player available. I think Caleb Downs to Dallas might be one of those real rare exceptions of players. And McCoy when he went to the Raiders. I think they're like 2 of about probably 10 instances this draft where that vertical board kind of kicked in. And then you have a situation like Tampa where the vertical board and horizontal board completely played out in jackpot mode, where they got the player that they would have absolutely died to have got, who they gave themselves a 1% chance of getting. And I think the analysis of how a player like Ruben Bain drops to 15 is because everybody picked their need and didn't actually pick what they require. Like they didn't go on best player available, because I think in previous drafts a player like that doesn't get passed down that low. So I think for me it is that case of people really picked on need early, because especially as in some positions there was such a deficiency in terms of the tier drop-offs that you had to go and get a guy. Like if you didn't get a guy on offensive line in the first round, you weren't getting a guy. It was that simple. Like you go take one later, but he's the best.
Reese got to the 6th, didn't he? 6 picks to the Giants. I don't think they thought at any point that he was going that far down. No. And others above them went for wide receivers and stuff, when not necessarily what you would have expected before the draft, that 4th pick.
Yeah, and I think, and again, that kind of shows a little bit on, but then that goes into Colm's point, I think, for me, where it's just bad teams make bad decisions. And
and we're going to talk probably about him in a minute, but another element that has to come into that is like, this is obviously not really fantasy relevant, but teams, when they're building out their rosters, need to be thinking about the cost of some of these contracts. So like, let's say Jeremiah Love, like talented player, but like you go at that point, you're now basically one of the most expensive running backs in the league. You get him to a second contract, he's going to have to be, if he performs well, the most expensive running back in the league and set the running back market. Whereas you could take some of these wide receivers who maybe you're like, don't know about the upside, but you get, the contract is going to kind of help you in some of these situations. And there's those kind of elements that are obviously nothing to do with fantasy, but just when we're trying to see how these organizations are maybe making decisions, because you look at the Cardinals, for example, and that they get Tyler Algier through free agency to keep James Conner. Like, you're allocating so much money to the running back. There's some things that just don't make a whole pile of sense. And that's why then when I'm saying about some of these teams and organizations, there's some of them you might be like, they have a track record. I want to give them credit for this decision. But then there's other ones where you're like, yeah, you've done it again. Why have you done it again?
Yeah, and it goes to, it always, whenever you speak to people about who don't know about the NFL and don't know about drafts, for example, and they're like, why is it that certain teams end up at the top of the draft board more often than not? And it's because of this. They make historically bad decisions.
And then that's where, again, coming to that point of like drafting for need, the teams that are probably run the best, they might have had a bad season. Let's say the Kansas City Chiefs like weren't projected to go there. They get themselves a spot at this point of the draft and they're really thinking like, how do we maximize it? So they should be then going for best player available rather than a team need, because realistically they should be a team that can bounce back rather than have to fill 10 holes on their roster, which some of these other teams need to do. And like, maybe they're the teams that should be trying to move back. This draft might have been harder to move back, but as you say, there's limitations to what players were available even in those first 10 picks. So maybe like looking in hindsight, if I was with the Cardinals, I probably look to move back and don't take Jeremiah Love and then have multiple picks either this year or next year to try and fill out some of the holes that they have on that roster.
Yeah, and I think as well, like, it was an unprecedented back end of round one with all those trades. And that to me tells you everything. That you had three teams who just decided that they were going to buck the trend and cash in on picks. And like, great, we'll keep trading back. And in all three of those instances, with the 49ers, with the Bills in particular, stupid decisions by my book. You're a couple of players away from really contending, and great, you got a boatload of picks, you buy yourself more lottery picks, but you've missed out on real, like I think the Bills and the 49ers really missed out on getting players who I think could have made a significant difference. You think of the wide receivers that were passed up by the Bills by trading back 3 times, I think was scarily bad. So I think as well, all those trade ups, people sort of sensed that and went, we're going to go get our guy. There was a lot of go and get our guy kind of movement.
The other thing with those first round picks when you move up is you also do get the 5th year option, which can be very valuable. Yeah.
Yeah, it's huge because we've seen it now with the holdouts, with, those franchise tags. You really don't want to get players onto the franchise tag because of the fact you know they're holding out more and more. Player power is really dictating that players won't play on that franchise tag that often. I know Pickens has signed his, but there aren't going to be that many instances now. I think it's going to be less and less.
Yeah.
So having that 5th year option, that opportunity to really work out where that person's value is and how you can set their market is going to be really key. Let's talk about these. Obviously we got the big shocks, and we talked about this with Mags last week. Ty Simpson to the Rams. I think there were probably 1 or 2 other big shocks. What were for you, Colm, the sort of the big shocks that you would state?
Well, I don't. We mentioned Jeremiah Love. I don't think it was a big shock, but I think it could be a big problem. I think he'll be good football player and all things considered, but I just think smart decision making by smarter organizations would have let that pass. I was very afraid that he was going to end up with the Giants. You mentioned the situations the Giants then found themselves in, being able to pick the O-line man, and that obviously has worked out great because I am a big Cam Scadaboo fan, and I was afraid that was going to have significant impacts if Love landed there. But I do think the one that, like, you know, people look at in the future, and if we're like grading how a draft went, the Ty Simpson pick fits into that category of the Jordan Love pick. And I'm a Packers fan, so that allows kind of maybe a greater understanding of how that decision happened and how it worked out, because the Packers are in that Super Bowl window. You want to be adding, let's say, a wide receiver or a skill position player, or maybe even a defensive back to try and push over the line. And that's where the Rams, I'm sure, are sitting. But you also find where a lot of these smarter organizations that continue to have success year on year, decade on decade, they're not afraid to take a player, again, who are looking at like the upside of the best opportunity available, best player available. And like we've seen, although they've had a lot of success, Matthew Stafford's arm at the end of a lot of seasons has got into trouble. He's had some elbow issues. I do think that like probably maximum of 2 seasons left. I think he is probably this year, and that's it. So you have to have a contingency plan, and we see a lot of these teams shuffling through quarterbacks and trying to find the quarterback of the future. And some teams have had a lot of luck in recent years with, you know, Geno had a resurgence in Seattle. We've seen Seattle obviously have a huge resurgence this year with Sam Darnold. We've seen Baker Mayfield, for example, you know, players who have failed and then done well at a second team. But I do think given somebody who is ultimately a very raw prospect with a high ceiling, similar to what Jordan Love was, for example, and then having him sit behind Bradford, you know, the one concern I have here is I don't know if McVay sticks around after, not Bradford, sorry, I've said that twice, like Stafford is gone. And then that's going to leave a situation where maybe he's left in not the best offensive position. But I think that while it's a big shock, I think this is what smart teams do, but this is also part of that thing where I'm like, I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt. If this was a team that I thought consistently made bad decisions, I probably would go against it. The other thing is they have for years and years been like, we don't want picks. Let's just trade all our picks away. They kept their first round pick for a change this year, the Rams, and they've gone and they've got a quarterback. But I think that was the biggest shock of the draft, but I also think that it has the potential to be something very smart from the Rams to do. I guess the one that stood out, and this is where with this draft class, it was kind of pretty unique that the consensus kind of top 10, top 15 was kind of aligned across a lot of the draft community. But when you got from like pick 15 through the rest of the draft, it was like some people loved some players, some people hated some players, and it was all over the place. But not a lot of people had Stribling going, you know, at the start of round 2. And while that, I think, was a big reach, and a team who has had a lot of success but has had constant issues in the draft, whether it's reaching for players or whether it's making poor draft decisions, is the 49ers. But there is elements of what Stribling can do that I think could be very, very positive for the 49ers. But if he was picked at the first pick of the 3rd round, I would be like, this is a really good pick. The 2nd round was a bit early. So I think that was a shock based on just expectation of where he would go versus where he went.
I hate the pick. I hate the pick all around. I think it's a classic position of people love it because they love that offense. So people are like, they don't love the talent, but they love the fact that it's like, okay, we really want to buy into pieces of the McVay piece. And I'm with you. If he goes in the 4th round, which is where he was projected to go, then you're looking at him as like a late 2nd round, 3rd round pick in rookie drafts. And I'm like, let's go. I'd take a punt to see what happens. But I just don't feel there's elements of him because of his, you know, run blocking ability, and he'll do all that sort of dirty work to get on the field. I'm like, that's fine. But realistically, his best shot is going to come in the back end of his rookie contract, because you've got CMC, Kittle, Evans, Pearsall. I don't think he beats out Christian Kirk early, if we're talking about him getting any kind of time.
I think, though, I was a big Christian Kirk stan when he came out of college. I do think that Christian Kirk is pretty much toast at this point of his career.
Yeah, I think so. But you're still talking about like the fifth mouth to feed in that offense.
Pearson never stays fit though, does he? He's always injured. And Kittle's injured as well.
They took Pearsall in round 1 as well. Like, obviously, he's had his issues off the field, and some of that really probably couldn't be helped with the incident that happened before his rookie season. But like, they have done this time and time again, and I do think in the fantasy community in general, because he was a first-round pick and because he's had some of these off-the-field issues that have kept him from being able to play, and he had one huge game 2 seasons ago, I think people are kind of in a little bit on Pearsall, whereas I think that I could see a path here to like an aging Mike Evans could be done. And I thought he's kind of last year, he obviously had his injuries, but he's had a hugely manufactured 1,000-yard season 2 years ago. Then he came back last year and kind of was there. I don't see this offense. I think George Kittle's obviously the guy at the front of the queue here. And then you've Christian McCaffrey, who you have to contend with, when we're looking at leading receivers on the team. But I could see him being there as the 2A or 2B behind Mike Evans in terms of receiving options. They have 150 vacated targets from last season, but I don't want to be like sounding here like I think I love the pick, but I don't. But I just think when we look at some of these picks for the draft, like one of the things I worry about every year is like this player, what's the landing spot? Oh, we've got crushed by the landing spot. Or 2 wide receivers have ended up on the same roster. It's not very clear what's going to happen going forward. But this is a depth chart at wide receiver where I think there's a potential, if he's worth this pick, and the 49ers have invested in him, that we could see some of that success even in year 1.
Yeah, I just don't buy I don't buy John Lynch's draft strategy.
No, I definitely don't. And what I'm saying about these teams that are making wrong decisions,
he makes a lot of them. Yeah. We only have to look at the 3 draft picks that he spent to get Trey Lance.
Well, if we look like they have, they got pretty, I won't say fortunate, but you draft a player where they draft Brock Purdy, and for him to turn out to what he's been is very fortunate. They have a really like elite level head coach. They have Christian McCaffrey, who they did trade for, but if they didn't have Christian McCaffrey and they hadn't drafted George Kittle and they didn't have that court, like this, them 3 players cover up a massive amount of issues on this organization, along with the coach. Like if we look at like Brandon Ayuk and what happened there, and they had Deebo Samuel and he just kind of didn't want to play anymore for them either. There's lots of problems with like how they've given out contracts and how the back office is managed, but the Stribling pick was definitely a reach. So I think based on your return there, you're definitely agree that it was a shock.
Well, I don't even have him that high. I have him at 37 in my Dynasty rankings. I don't want any part of him. It feels like, do you know when something, it looks bad, it smells bad. It can't be as bad.
The pick that I remember that was like this, that the entire fantasy community just decided like, no, we're not doing that, was Amari Cooper when the Packers drafted him in the 2nd round, and they're like, yeah, he's in the 4th round of Dynasty rookie drafts.
I mean, that one felt bad. The other one was Bucky Irving because of his size. A lot of people were all mistake. Out on Bucky Irving, whereas I threw the chips in and went the other way for me because you could see what he could do.
Yeah.
It's an interesting one. I can't get there on Stribling. The tape doesn't back it up for me. The scheme fit doesn't back it up for me. And then you're looking at what he's got there. He needs a lot of things to go against, like to go for him, like all those injuries. But we'll get into him. But it'd be interesting to see. But I think it's amazing. What I find fascinating is this idea of groupthink, that people see San Francisco, they see top of 2nd round, they see wide receiver, and they get extremely excited without really thinking about what's the pathway to him and his success, and what does he need to have happen for that to happen. And I think there's a little bit too much right now. Now that room could clear out a year from now. CMC could be on his way to being finished, and they revert back to a more traditional running back. And, Mike Evans might go, do you know what? I know I've got a 3-year deal, but my money was front weighted. I might just call it quits. This isn't Tampa. I'm done. And Pearsall might just be an absolute shot wide receiver, and they're absolutely cooked. And And in which case, then you're looking at it and thinking, yeah, there's a great pathway to him, but that's a lot of things that need to happen for it.
I think a big part of it is like he had college production and then it kind of fell off a bit after that
Badly.
point. But yeah, the trouble is though, there's a certain element to like, and the Packers have done this for years, and like I would call them a well-run organization, but they like to go for elite traits, players who have like certain combinations that don't come around very often. We're talking about this draft as like, you had to go and get your guy, or there wasn't certain things that you could get overly excited about, but like the size and the athleticism and kind of the way he can be used at multiple depths, he is good after the catch. Like there is the ability for him to go vertical as well. Like there's things, it's like that, that thing, like it hasn't worked yet. The meme though, it's like it didn't work for those people, but it could work for us. It's like it hasn't happened, but he definitely has those athletic traits that it could happen in the right situation. So that is the kind of part that I would be buying in. If I was buying in, is it could click, but a lot of the time, if it doesn't click in college, and you're there for multiple years, and you're an older player, like he's an older player as well, the likelihood it clicks is tough. But that's where the draft capital could potentially be like, well, they have to give it a chance to work. So it's kind of what side of the fence you want to be on. But
see, I just get the opinion that Kyle Shanahan doesn't care about draft capital. Like, I don't think he cares. I think they're one of those organizations that once you're drafted, it doesn't matter. It's a sunk cost. It's done and dusted. You are what you are.
Once we give you a multi-year contract, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. You're here no matter what. It's a spent cost. You're either going to do it or you're not. Like, we've made that call. It's done. Let's talk a little bit about the top 3 wide receivers in this draft coming in. There was a lot of debate between these 3 wide receivers, where they would come in terms of where they would land, who would come out on top, in Lemon, in Tyson, and in Tate. What's your kind of views on this post-draft? Did you have an opinion pre-draft on how you ranked them, and then have you changed your opinion based on their landing spots and draft capital?
I always had them in a pretty close tier after Love in terms of like what I thought they would do for fantasy. I had Lemon, Tate, and Tyson, like obviously pretty close. The one thing here now as we move out is I basically have them in the same order, but the part is that, like, again, if we're looking at the positives and the negatives, there's pros and cons for all of these. Like, I think Lemon has a tremendous profile to be a massive fantasy star, but the part that lands in the issue is, like, I'm not at all at any point convinced that Jalen Hurts is the quarterback to kind of have players be consistent fantasy stars. And then I also have concerns about how the Eagles have run their offense for fantasy purposes outside of the running back and quarterback positions over the last kind of 2-3 seasons. So you look at how the team is set up, and I just have a lot of concerns as how they could maximize him moving forward. I feel like if he landed on a different roster, let's say he even was with the Titans, I think I would be much more excited about like his instant impact as we move forward here. With Tyson then, you know, he lands in a situation where I have to give, like, when we talk about organizations who made bad decisions for years and are now starting, I think, to make really smart decisions, the Saints have, I think, really started to put themselves in a positive spot. And Tyson's limitations now are that he's landed himself opposite Chris Olave, who had a resurgence last season, and now we're looking at, like, you know, is he going to be the true wide receiver one early in his career, and can he surpass Chris Olave? And I think the ability is there to do it, but I also think it's a real hindrance and a roadblock. But in those situations, sometimes you say, well, you're playing opposite Justin Jefferson, so you should be able to get open. Like, you're playing opposite the guy who they're going to cover, so you should get more opportunities. But I do think that, like, there's the questions with that. And then you get to Tate, who, if we're looking at who is in the position to be the wide receiver one, to get the monster workload, it is Tate. Then you're sitting with, like, how, again, back to this thing, how our teams run, how our organization's set up. And the Titans have had that kind of stink on them for quite a number of years. And Cam Ward, who I was optimistic would have a strong rookie year, certainly did not have that. And there's parts of his game that I still really like and have optimism for. But when we look at the metrics from last season, like, Ward struggled in a multitude of ways. So is it like, can they pair up in terms of what Tate needs to be a superstar at the NFL level? So I think there's pathways to all these boys being absolute studs from fantasy, but I have them paired basically in a tier of 1B after Love at the 1A spot. So they're basically my second tier when we look at how it's set up. And I could listen to arguments for people who want to have them either way, but I would prefer Lemon, Tyson, and then Tate. But I could see if we see that jump forward in year 2 from Cam Ward, that Tate becomes the one in that group.
So I have exactly the same order as you do, and I have it for very similar reasons, in the sense of where I'm probably a little different to you is I actually think that Eagles landing spot's pretty good. The fact that I think a lot of the struggles with the Eagles is they've had 5 different offensive coordinators in 5 years. And in a couple of those instances, and then now we've got in this instance, they've hired a rookie offensive coordinator who's never called plays before. And we've got it this year. Where I'm perhaps a little different this year is you got Sean Marion calling plays, which, first of all, I find hilarious because he only gave up playing 4 years ago. Sean Marion. I don't feel like he was I'm pretty sure he was playing not that long ago. But as well for me that his first job in coaching really when it's straight in the NFL was the Packers. And you talk about good organizations, places that you're going to go and learn the fundamentals of offense. That's a pretty good one under Adam Stenovich and Matt LaFleur. That's a pretty good spot. Like, it's not a crazy, like, going in the McVay tree or going into which people get overhyped. And then I think they get overhired too quickly and overrushed. But I think he will have a good fundamental offensive plan where last year that offense was just wrong and Petullo just called a really bad offense for me. They couldn't decide how they were going to use the weapons. And I think the fact that they tried to get Brown and they tried to get Devonta Smith just literally playing almost exactly the same and just have him go vertical just doesn't make any real sense. I think this year they will use Mackay Lemon as that sort of weapon underneath. I think you'll see a lot of that, almost like that old-fashioned like Larry Fitzgerald role, where you're just going to give Jalen Hurts a bit of cover, especially in like the RPO. And especially in those sort of quick outs, just to get the ball downfield a little bit. I think that's where I see him operating.
That's where I see him operating, but the problem is with like, they drafted Stowers as well, who I'm optimistic about, but they have Goddard, who they took back for this year. And obviously you mentioned Antonio Brown. Like, I think that the rumors have been there for the trade of Antonio Brown to move him out of Philadelphia.
AJ
but
Brown,
like,
yeah.
All right, sorry. But if you, who did I say?
Antonio.
Oh my goodness gracious me! It's 20 past 9. You can tell.
That's why I was like, I'd add Devonta Smith. We're all good.
There's a couple of us here with young kids. You can tell it's taking. This is a late night for me. But when you look at like if he's still there, that's gonna be problematic. I'm a big Devonta Smith fan, but there's just like with Dallas Goedert and then my concerns around like I just like. I don't want to be harsh, but I just don't think Jalen Hurts is a great quarterback. Like he's a tremendous rushing quarterback, but I think if you're looking then for this offense, if Brown gets moved and we're looking at the slot, and then you're looking at him and Goddard kind of fighting for those targets, and Goddard has been a reliable target for Hurts over over the last couple of seasons, and that's where I'm afraid of like. Again, if we go back to the Bears, for example, it feels like a fairly similar scenario from last season's draft where they get Loveland and they get Burden. And then like we're working our way through the season. We're excited about these two rookies. And really until the very end of the season, they don't really start to use them. And I could see something similar.
I think where that was different was you still had
DJ Moore.
You had DJ Moore and you had Odunze. So you had a really crowded room. And I don't think the room is that crowded in Philadelphia because it's and that.
Do you think Brown definitely gets traded then?
Yeah, that sounds like it's all done and it's just cap reasons. It sounds like it's a post June 1st trade.
Yeah, it does sound like that.
because it's just managing the cap. So I really, what I'm more interested in is what's the compensation. That's the part I'm really intrigued about, because surely you would have looked to get picks this year. Maybe they decided they want to get picks next year, and that's absolutely fine, but probably a better class. But I'm looking at who they've got now on that depth chart, right? And this is a pretty weak depth chart. You've got, Mackay Lemon, and you got Devonta Smith. Then you got, after that, they signed Dontarian Wicks, which I don't think Dontarian Wicks is a great fit for what
my joke with Wicks has always been that he's got feet for hands.
Yeah.
But he is, like, in terms of like athleticism and that, can do all that stuff, but can't pass the ball.
But I kind of don't see how he kind of works in this offense. And then you got Hollywood Brown, who is just effectively the again a square peg round hole kind of receiver, and you got Quez Watkins, you've got Elijah Moore. Like, it's just a load of guys here that don't really.
It's 2 wide receivers and 2 tight ends, isn't it? Basically, what they've got.
Well,
but the reason I'm mentioning it is that we have Stowers and Goddard, who are like essentially partially slot receivers, and then you have a slot receiver, and then you have an outside wide receiver in Devonta Smith. So it's not necessarily that the entire package, like, because you have to get the ball to Saquon, and then you have to get the ball for Jalen, his rush attempts. But then, like, it's a small enough pie in terms of the pass attempts that we're going to see, and then. If they're all going to be, like, again, if it's all going to be slot opportunities for those 3 players, it's going to lead to not a very dynamic offense again.
Well, I think that's what happens, and I think Devonta Smith is the big loser on draft night. I think the Eagles have told you that they tried to go too deep last year, and that's what cost them. They don't trust that ability. I think they are going to play dink and dunk football. I think that's realistically what I'm seeing. From all the moves they're making in this offseason, they're basically telling you that they're not that bothered about going wide and deep. And I think that the big loser on draft night for me, one of them was Devonta Smith, because as much as he's probably the only guy that will go over the top, I see him more in that traditional burner role now of what we saw his rookie year, not getting punched with a load of targets, but he'll get those meaningful, like, deep shot, cheap shots downfield. So I can see him getting a huge target regression in this offense. And I think Mackay Lemon is going to pick up a good chunk of that. I think Stowers will too. I actually think Dallas Goedert is the guy who will be faded out of this offense. I think it was not their first call to bring him back. I know they did bring him back, but they left that late. That wasn't.
Yeah, I was surprised they kept him. And I would still say if a call came, they would be willing to.
Oh, he'd be gone.
On. Yeah.
He'd be gone. If someone came in with a 3rd or 4th round pick, he'd be off that roster tomorrow.
Yeah. Are you guys saying no? If you were looking at it from all the different formats, are you guys saying Lemon's a great pick in Dynasty because long term some of those guys will move on and stuff? He's more risky in redraft for this year.
Yeah, I would say Dynasty. He's probably my big winner. Redraft, I'd probably have him. Depends on the format. I'd probably have him in the middle of the 3. I'm just all out on that Titans offense. I think Tate is going to get a lot of work. It wouldn't shock me if he got a 30% target share. It wouldn't shock me.
I feel like when I was talking through like how they're ranked and he's 3rd, like, and I said he could be like, we could be like 8 weeks into the season and we could feel like I wish I had like, in terms of if you have him in your dynasty roster and like after 8-10 weeks of the season, maybe you could flip him for Lemon plus, a 2nd round pick or so, that sort of way. So that I feel like he could get the opportunity early. And if Ward takes a step forward, he could be very good straight away. With Lemon though, I do think there's some comparisons to just what I mentioned with Burden, where love Burden coming out of the draft, love the landing spot. There was a lot of talk about how, the offensive coordinator would use him in Chicago, how that would all play out. And it didn't really play out to the end of the season. But then at the end of the season, you're like, whoa, I'm so glad that I have Burden on my rosters because he's set up for year 2. I think that we could be looking at something very similar with Lemon here. And the part then when we get into year 2 is the QB situation. But I do think that if we're working out of the slot and we're trying to complete, 10, 15-yard passes, maybe Jalen Hurts can do that for us. I do think in year 2, depending on what happens, both with the development of Shaw and if, like, depending on contract negotiations go, I think that Tyson could push himself to that wide receiver 1 in New Orleans as well. But again, there is the question marks. Like, is Shaw somebody who's going to turn from, like, now he's a little bit of a Cinderella story? Does he turn back into a pumpkin in year 2 when there's more tape on what he's able to do? There's just some questions around them all. So I think long-term Lemon is still the one I would want to have.
And the thing is, you're talking about New Orleans. That is the ultimate, like, everybody there is at risk of significant injuries. I mean, Tyler Shirk played 7 years in college. He still didn't throw the ball 1,000 times because he just went down every 2 minutes. You've got, Tyson is known to have significant injuries.
Well, that's pre-draft. That was the tiebreaker for me. That was the tiebreaker, though. Is like, there's difference in having multiple different types of injuries, and like that might just be something that he can do at the NFL level and not get hurt, but it just is something that's in your mind a little bit.
I think for me, when I looked at the tiebreakers, I had Lemon ahead at the start. I have Lemon ahead now. I think he's a bit more versatile in his route tree. I think he can go into more offenses and find a role that's going to be serviceable and good. I think Tyson has landed in a pretty good spot because I don't think Chris Olave is a long-term option. I think he's one concussion away from probably ending it anyway.
And that's where I was saying about, when they get to the contract negotiations, like they have some leverage now because they have drafted a first-round wide receiver, but they also have like, do you want to take this money from us now in case anything happens, or do you want to test the market and see what other people will give you? And there is some leverage for them, and that then could either force Olave to look for more money elsewhere, or it could be a situation where Tyson just naturally progresses into being the lead guy there.
Yeah. Is there any same column? You do a lot of drafts, you're in a lot of competitions. Is there a thought process of potentially splitting across the three of them and having, in each team having, different variations of them so that you sort of covered in a few different ways as well?
Yeah, I think depending, I guess, you said I playing a lot of, I probably playing too many terms across the board for redraft or and things like that. But what I think you want to be aware when it comes to any player or any draft board, kind of the profile of the player, and not be saying there'll be certain players you do want to draft, but if it's a group like this where I'm saying it's basically a pretty even tier and there's certain tiebreakers. Like if I ended up having a draft slot where Lemon goes ahead of me and then I can draft Tyson, I'd be happy with that. Or if both of those guys go, you're going to try and get yourself exposure to all of the players, because I think there's things to like about them all. And I'm kind of saying with Tate, I do feel like he's the one where early in the season, he should get 30% of the targets. They should be a bad team. He should be getting a lot of work. If you're playing in PPR leagues, he's catching 8 balls, from week 4 through week 9, you're going to be in a strong position. So he's the one by default. It looks like he could have the early work. So it's not a case that I'd be I don't want any of these guys. But if I'm in a dynasty draft, and if it's a case where I think Tyson might go at the spot that I'm in and I could move back and get Lemon, for example, I'd be interested in acquiring more. But if I'm in the draft spot and I'm if the person moves up, he's going to take Lemon, but I can get a second round pick to move back one spot, I'll probably still take that opportunity as well. I'm not wedded to if I don't get him, the other two guys are terrible. So I'm pretty comfortable with all of them. And that's where it's kind of, you have I have an optimism that they could all succeed, but I also can I'm kind of playing devil's advocate when I'm sent to Murf, Lemons in a situation with a terrible quarterback and all this sort of stuff. You kind of have to look at it from those angles you want to know the range of outcomes as to how it could or couldn't work out. And if you have to sit with that player in your roster for a season as a rookie where he isn't getting the workload, to be comfortable with that, on your own.
It depends on your team as well, doesn't it? If you're right at that top and you're looking for something to just take you over the edge for that season, then you might go Tate because you're saying you're already expecting that production straight away. Or if you're looking for the high upside, you might go for one of the other two.
But that's the part then, again, when we go back to the NFL teams and building their rosters, there is some similarities to how we should be building our teams and looking ahead to the following seasons. And sometimes it is that you can't be sure that a certain player is going to be a massive hit. I've had a rookie draft already, and in that draft, I ended up and it wasn't a pick that I had anticipated before the draft, but I have a Jaden Daniels and Josh Allen team. and I had traded away some veterans during last season, and I took both Mendoza, and then in the second round I took Ty Simpson. And like that's a league where there's a taxi squad, so like Simpson I can carry, but we don't know that in 2 years' time that he's not going to be worth 2 first-round picks. And you know, you kind of, and that's where like me talking about the Rams making some smart decisions. Sometimes you have to make those decisions that this isn't the best player for me right now, because the reason is if we get into rookie camp or into the preseason and Tate is crushing it, like we don't have to keep these players on our rosters during the season. Like unless you're playing best ball where you can't move them, you can draft these players and you can trade them in 3 weeks' time. You know, you can draft Lemon now and then AJ Brown gets traded, and it's expected that he's going to get traded, but there'll still be a little bump in expectation and excitement for people. So you could potentially still gain in between. So you could draft Lemon, Tate, or Tyson, and you could be like, I really need a running back on this team. But that doesn't mean that you should draft Pierce. You should draft you should draft one of those guys, and then maybe you move them for something else before the season, or move one of your veteran wide receivers before the season. So I'm very comfortable if like my team doesn't have to look good on May the 1st, but it like needs to be ready week 1 of the season. So I wouldn't be afraid to, like, need is not something that I tend to draft for, trying to get the player I think is the best and they'll have the most return, you know, in the future.
Exactly similar to what you said. I've got an example there where I was doing a draft a couple of days ago and I came second last year, so I'm on the 111 and I'm pretty happy with the team as a whole. So I took Simpson at the 111 thinking, well, there's no one I really fancy at the back end. The team looks pretty good. I'll stick him on the taxi squad and see how it plays out. And
the thing with that is too, it's a risk tolerance thing and a thing of like, oh, this player, like this is a waste of picking. You might never play in the NFL. You might get never anything. But if you look at the players that are going at the 1-2 turn and Dynasty drafts this year, that could be all of those players. Like he might not play this season, but he will hold his value through the entirety of next off season because he's not expected to play this year and it's kind of already baked in.
Yeah, and if there is an injury to Matt Stafford, then you know you're cashing early. Like that's the key thing. Yep. I just can't get my head around Tate at 2. I can't do it because I think of the 3 players he has the lowest ceiling. Mm-hmm. I think he's the one that starts right away, and I think he's the one that will probably, if you say to me at the end of the first season, he will have more fantasy points, I wouldn't argue a heavy case against it. But what you are doing is you're drafting your need and projection, and at 102, I would rather be thinking about who's the guy who's going to get me out of the hole. I'm at the 102 for a reason, unless I've traded into that spot. So I don't need instant gratification points. If I wanted that, I could have traded my 2-2 for a veteran wide receiver who's going to yield a very similar output. Yeah. Like if you, that's the mindset of, if you're looking for immediate points, drafting a player in the top 4 of a rookie draft is probably not where you need to be. Where you need to be is if you're looking to just get immediate points, there's cheaper and easier ways to do it, which is just facilitating some trades for veteran players who people want to get off their rosters that will do a job for a year, help you climb a little bit. And then you want to draft these guys who have, you know, I don't hate Tyson at 2. I don't hate Lemon at 2. I don't hate either of those. I have Lemon ahead in my rankings, but if someone went, do you know what? I just like the pass rate in New Orleans. We know they're more aggressive on offense. We know there's a bit more production, a bit more going around for Tyson to feast longer, plus the pathway of maybe they get rid of Chris Olave. That's fine. I like that logic. That's fine. You do that. I think that makes sense. I just can't find a world where if I was sitting at the 102, Carnell Tate would be the pick. I just can't. I don't even think at the 104 I like it. I know I have him at 4 in my rankings, but I kind of feel like in that situation, unless I traded into that pick or I got that pick and I'm actually in a better spot, I'd rather go for one of the later guys. I'd rather go for, you know, a Boston, a Cooper, a Concepcion, who I'm lower on than everybody else. But I'd rather go there and think about trying to chance my arm because all these players have higher things. I just think Tate's going to be a pretty good NFL player who's going to have a pretty good NFL career. But
it's the early opportunity. Yeah. Like, I don't know if you talk about, but like a lot of talk over the last like 5-6 years had been the running back dead zone when we look at redraft and some of the players who have like projected opportunity come week one, and that's something that I've like religiously avoided is those type of players. But I'm not saying that's not what Tate is, but he is. If you're in a draft, if you ask your league mates, a lot of them will be like, he's going to get the work. He has the opportunity. But you're making the point that like it's the multi-year play and how you can get the most upside. And I do think this draft, one of the things I've been doing, particularly when we get to the second round and third round of these drafts, is there might be players where I'm like, yeah, it's pretty even, but I'm going for like, which has the ceiling. And like some years I might have been more like, I'm going to stick with the profile, but the split for me a lot of the time in the second, third round this year has been the ceiling of who I think makes the biggest swing.
Are you doing much trading with the picks, Colm?
I found this year, so far in the drafts I've had, very hard to move, kind of because people have players in quite large tiers. Like if I was at the 102 in a draft, I'd be willing to try and move back as far as the 104 with the chance that Tate goes at the 102 or 103, and then you get one of Lemon or Tyson. And I think he can do that. But I think once you go past that, and if you're in a super flex league, once you go past, like, then you can add in Mendoza to that. You start to get into a point where people are like, well, like you were saying, I kind of like Concepcion, or I do. I'm the opposite. I like Concepcion, but you know, somebody might be like, I like Boston, or there's a couple of guys at the back. I would take Price if he's there, and that means that it's very hard for you to be like, the tier breaks at 7, move up to the 107 for me. Like
I haven't been trading back much. I've been getting short of the picks, full stop in a lot of cases. And going
I love trying to like trade back and gain as many picks, like even if it's only small gains. Something like trying to just add and add and add. And this year I was trying in the third round in particular to move it because I had quite a few picks to move into 2027 and try and move a third this year for a second. And I tried to move the 302 to a person and the 305 to a person, the same person, for the second round pick, and I couldn't get them to do it. And then when it got to the 310, there was obviously a player that they were like, the guy I want is like there, and they obviously got that like FOMO of missing out. And like for the 310, they give me the second round pick that they wouldn't give me for the 302.
That's bonkers.
So it just depends on like how the drafts go. People, you really need that element of like, I have to get my guy at that pick, or you need players to do that to be willing to move up.
I feel like I've done more trades in the last week than I've ever done, and I thought it would be the opposite, because I thought I can't get rid of these picks, and I just
never give out. If you can get people trading in your league, take that as a very good thing.
Yeah, but I wasn't expecting it, and I've just thrown out so many offers, and like I've just gone for like, in a lot of cases where I'm just looking for where I'm short, and I'm thinking, if I don't have that much confidence in these players, I'm going to go for someone I know who can do the job I need now. So like, say for example, I don't know, one I'm just looking at some of the trades I've done. The 107, I took Jared Goff. There's other ones there where I'm really contending and I just need a bit more help, where I've traded a late one for Derrick Henry. And I know there's no like long term to it, but I want to try and win now. Then there's a few other ones of like rookies that were really highly thought of last year that really didn't do much, that you can actually get cheaper in the second.
Yeah, and this wasn't in the show, but one of my big things, and I have a show that I recorded yesterday, but it's not going to come out for about another week and a half, but it's the 2020, the 2025 rookies, which are now the second year running backs. I think there's still a huge amount of them that you can like gain leverage from trading for now. So
I give you an example.
I don't want to knock you down on the Derrick Henry trade, but I wouldn't give up a first round pick for it. Do you have a receipt for that? Can you get that back?
I know what you're saying. It's just sometimes it's just like, I'm just going for it. Like I'm in that many different ones, but like I give you another example. With one that I did like was I was looking at I gave away the 202 and the 206, and I got Jalen Higgins and the 301 in return. So
right, well, I definitely do that. Yeah.
So that was the one I offered, and he accepted it. I just looked at the prices, and I was thinking, trying to look at those players that people thought of really highly last year who haven't actually done it yet. And there's players left who should give them more opportunities as well.
You'll remember this, Murf, too. There used to be, like, with any player that you drafted, used to be a 3-year window when it came to Dynasty, particularly at wide receiver. Like, and I really like players like Keenan Allen or Devontae Adams, the 3-year window. But people just were like, a bit like, this is before TikTok, but people were like, Yeah, you haven't done it. It's week 6. Get off there, Austin.
Get off.
So, but like, I do think that if you, again, that's why when you're looking at these players and looking at the profiles, what they've done at college, what their kind of athleticism is, that stuff doesn't fade between year 1 and year 2. But you will get some new information, whether the team used them or didn't use them, or it could have been injury related. But if they were given opportunities and failed with it, can be problematic. But the likes of a Higgins, who you mentioned, like, it seemed to be every couple of games you would look up and you're like, oh, Higgins got 2 targets. Oh, he's caught another touchdown. Like, maybe if we give this guy 6 targets a game, it would be beneficial. So it's like, he's somebody I still have a lot of hope for.
Another one which Murf will laugh at me for because he knows I've already got too much ownership of him. But another one was I got rid of, I got rid of the 201 and the 311 for Bashal Tootin.
Okay, well that's an absolute bargain. Like, I think if Tootin was in this draft now, knowing that he's the lead back for the Jaguars, I think he would be in the conversation at like the 106. Like, based on, if we're talking about opportunity heading into the season.
I think I've got over 60% ownership of Tootin in my Dynasty drafts, and I got most of them in like the 3rd rounds. But last year, I don't know, the way everything's fell so far, it just feels like I'm hoping Murf will probably throw cold water over it, but I'm hoping he's going to go off this year.
Listen, he's an interesting player in the sense of you would expect it to be better than it was last year, and he has got absolutely nothing behind him in terms of combat. Like LaQuint Allen, Chris Rodriguez, and DJ Dallas. Like, when we're talking about like a reject squad, if I've ever seen a reject squad. I do think there's a few running backs out there that have not been signed, and I do see the Jaguars getting a free agent. I think they're going to wait until late in the season. I think they're going to pick someone up late. I worry, but
I would still be willing. I would still be willing to give up those rookie picks that we're talking about.
Oh, totally, because they're worth nothing.
If he can't beat out the veteran running backs that are available, then like that's the end of the.
My two concerns on the Jags this year. One is that offensive line. I don't think they've done enough. I've seen enough Robert Hainsey at center to know that he's not good enough. So he's fine, but I don't think he's great. I don't like that offensive line. I don't think it's particularly great. I think he's going to struggle behind that offensive line. And then second of all, I just look at what they've got in that offensive tank. And it sounds like Travis Hunter's not going to play wide receiver this season. But so then you think about, it's Jacoby Myers, Brian Thomas Jr., and Parker Washington.
Don't start talking bad about Parker Washington. Don't do
a lot of Parker Washington.
I just kind of look at that and I just think it's a very lackluster.
Parker Washington's like my Cinderella story at the moment.
Well, you two go off and go and have some fun with Parker Washington, because I'm just not there. I think I'm going to be pretty out on a lot of these Jaguars players this year, just because I just can't see a path forward. But that's a different story.
I was going to say, Colm, are there any players that went in the draft where you thought, I can't believe how low they've actually gone? I thought they were going to be like 2nd or 3rd rounds and they've gone in the 5th or 6th. Or are there many examples of those type of players?
Not as many this year, because I think that the range of outcomes for how teams felt about some of these guys was pretty wide. And I think the consensus wasn't as concrete as it has been in other years, where you could be like there was a lot of talk. Somebody might be a day 2 player or a day 3 player. There wasn't so much talk this year as like this guy will be a 5th round player versus a 4th round player. It was kind of like, we're not overly sure. And the other part of that is there's like not as many of the prospects where you were like, this guy has to go. At this point, you're like, there is a range of like 30 to 60 picks where they could go. So not as much this year as other years. So it kind of felt a lot of them went where I thought they would go.
Yeah. Okay.
You with us, Murf? I don't know if he's froze.
Is he froze? I thought he was just waiting. Yeah.
He's very patient.
Question for you while we're waiting for him to come back.
Yeah.
Vegas. So, like, I keep expecting them to be drafting like wide receivers and getting some Max Mendoza, because I thought Sarath might have went there, with them playing together at college and stuff, and they literally haven't drafted anybody. So, like, how would you... His browser's cooked. He's just messaged me. He'll be back in a second, I think. So, like, if you were looking at that, probably more from a best ball, probably, because from a value point of view, who would you... Is there anyone there you'd be looking at as thinking their sneaky value because there's nobody there to throw to?
Well, Trey Tucker has been, like, surprisingly useful for fantasy. You know, if you had a real hole at wide receiver, you know, he was somebody who you could spot start. He did play... last season, had 92 targets, 57 receptions, 5 touchdowns. Like, there was weeks where he was definitely usable, and he kind of becomes their de facto wide receiver 1. But what I really think we'll see in this offense is that Brock Bowers is the wide receiver 1 essentially, and then we get Ashton Jeanty heavily rotated, and like they have Betch there, they have Naylor, but nothing to be massively excited about. But if I was picking one of the wide receivers that like is probably stashable, would be Trey Tucker. And I do think, like, I think Brock Bowers is going to go down as the best tight end of all time. So I'm very high on him. And I do think that Michael Mayer is the best backup tight end in the NFL. So if it was up to me, I would just play 2 tight end sets with Ashton Jeanty in the backfield and Trey Tucker at wide receiver and see how it works out from that perspective. But the part when we're talking about they're not adding wide receivers there, like they have added the elite running back. They've now added the QB1, hopefully for them, in Mendoza, and they have Brock Bowers there. Like they're adding the elite pieces, and then I think, like, if we look at how some of these teams with like contracts, salary cap, and so on, like they're going to get into a position where maybe if they have a quarterback, when we're looking at next offseason, people are like, Mendoza was good as a rookie, and they have Jeanty and they have Bowers. Maybe they can attract a free agent wide receiver because they'll have the salary cap to be able to do it, and maybe that's the route that they take. But at the moment, like when we're looking at the wide receivers, it's a poor setup of wide receivers they have. They even have Philip Dorsett, former Patriot speedster, on the roster. I think they're 7th. Like they have a lot of wide receivers signed, but they have no wide receivers on their roster, if that makes sense.
That's what I thought you were going. I thought you were going to say something along those lines. I was just looking through some of the teams today, and I was just scratching my head at that one, thinking like they just, except for, as you say, except for Bowers, who else has they got to throw to? Like, there was that one, and then another one I was going to ask. I'm just picking his brains while you jumped off.
That's all right. If you ever want to know why the Jags are going to be bad, they crashed this stream. I pull up the Jags depth chart, and it crashed my entire Chrome.
I think it was that you don't have full belief in Bashal Tootin having a great 2026. And
well, listen, my Google Chrome browser doesn't have any faith in the Jags or Bashal Tootin or anyone else. So that is the ultimate metaphor for just how bad the Jags are going to be. Like, literally, just taking one look at their depth chart has absolutely crashed the stream. So
at the back end of last season, he was telling me to sell some of my. I had too many Bashal Tootin shares, and instead I bought more. The other question I had for you, Colm, was, and it's I suppose it's for all formats, and it's something we always talk about, Murf, as well, is based off all the landing spots and how bad the running back room potentially was in the draft. Where do you see in those sneaky, like, handcuff running backs at the moment based off the landscape?
It's hard to look at like last year I was so positive on this, and Tootin was one of those, because it was like Etienne looked like he was trajectory down for multiple seasons, and then obviously he had like a really strong year for him, gets a big free agency contract. So there was a lot of guys last year who you're like, even Henderson sitting behind, for example, Stevenson, and how all those things could have potentially played out. But when we look then this year, I do think Katron Allen with the Commanders, he went in the 6th round, and you're looking at this time last year, the opportunity of who could potentially, go in there and get an opportunity behind Jaden Daniels. And we obviously got Bell or Krosky Merritt coming through training camp, a lot of buzz around that. And some games in there of positivity. But if we look at the actual depth chart in the roster there, like, he's the only guy that's on the, under contract beyond next season. So Allen is somebody who, I think at the running back position, I think in the running back position, sometimes we look at these later guys and they do have a pathway. I think he could be interesting there, just because I've wanted the Commanders to have a strong level running back since Daniels in his rookie season, and it just hasn't occurred yet. The other one that, again, there's a bit more of a competition to get into the lead role, and the offense, I think, will be probably much worse. But somebody I liked before the draft, mainly from a PPR perspective, was Eli Heidenreich, and he ended up with the Pittsburgh Steelers in the 7th round. And I think that, like, as a pass catcher, he has a lot of upside. So they're the two kind of later round guys that aren't that expensive that I would be liking to add to rosters. But there's not as many this year because the class wasn't as good for the running backs. But I had a lot more excitement last year about, like, the rookies overtaking the starters. But I do think that the second-year guys this year are going to be problematic for a lot of these rookies trying to overtake them. So, I think some of the second-year running backs will be able to step forward this season.
Yeah, I'm more into some of the late quarterbacks, actually, than I am some of the late players. I think, there's just enough interest in guys like Drew Aller, for example, Taylor Green. I think,
and then you get into the thing again about the value if one of them does work out versus if, like, one of these running backs has a couple of games, the potential return on investment is much higher. Like, your potential could be zero, but if one of the quarterbacks becomes a starter, you have gained quite a bit.
Yeah, there's always this sort of unwritten rule in Dynasty rookie drafts that you don't take running backs or wide receivers past the 3rd round of rookie drafts because there's no value to be had. Occasionally, you might get a little bump off somebody, and you should be plastering tight ends and quarterbacks there in the hopes of, especially in the Superflex, that any of these guys, like I look at Drew Aller, for example, and think that couldn't have been a better landing spot. You've got Aaron Rodgers maybe on a 1-year extension, which hasn't been inked, and I don't even think he will.
He might not be.
Yeah,
might not
and I don't think he will be. And then you're looking at a shootout between Drew Aller and Will Howard. I mean, like, there's every chance that
Steelers fans have to be excited. That must get you pumped up if you're a Steelers fan.
I mean,
quarterback.
I got a soft spot for Drew Aller. I actually think he's pretty decent. I think Taylor Green is a very, very exciting prospect, and I know there's this thought going around that Deshaun Watson's going to go and start. Well, we all know that a player who hasn't played for over 2 years, what that really looks like in the NFL, it doesn't work. Like, that will very quickly move on. And I think I look at him over versus like Dylan Gabriel. I think he's got every chance of making that roster. I really like Diego Pavia. Like, I know people cannot stand him for his attitude, but I just think he's got that moxie that just, I don't know. I just think a guy like that who's like, what, 5'10", 5'9", or whatever he is, like, to get I know he wasn't drafted, but he should have been, really. Yeah. But to be in that conversation and to get a 3-year deal in the NFL, I want to bottle up what he's got, because he is the 0.000000001%. Like, a guy like that shouldn't be in the NFL, and yet he is. So there is something about him that has this elite. It's kind of like, it's what I was saying a year ago about Shedeur Sanders. Shedeur Sanders, under any other circumstance, should never be drafted. There's nothing there's nothing elite about what he does. He doesn't have an elite arm. He's not a good athlete or elite athlete. He's got good ball placement. That's kind of about it. There's nothing else about him that's elite. But he must have the most elite mindset of any quarterback in previous years to get drafted, to get to that stage. And I think Diego Pavia is someone like that. So I think for me, like, I love your shout on Heidenreich. I think he's an interesting one. Sam Roush as well at Chicago.
Was that Scott talking about him by any chance? Because I listened to some of his pods and he's obsessed with that guy.
There was multiple people that we talked about before the draft. Travis May was on as well, and pretty much everyone that came on, I'd be like, if you any deeper sleeper running backs, and everyone mentions Heidenreich. So it was like, well, yeah, there's something here if everyone's banging the drum.
If you compared the stats at college to Christian McCaffrey's at college, if you weren't watching the game and you were just looking at the actual stats, they were actually very similar, apparently.
He's a tremendous receiver. It just depends then, like how there was a fear, coming out that he may get drafted as a receiver, but he was drafted as a running back. So like then obviously that leads into position allocation. Like if he's drafted as a wide receiver, he's kind of not really going to have any value in fantasy. Whereas now if he's drafted as a running back, but he's getting some of that third down work, you have a significant value if you're getting him at this price. So it's kind of that balance. Again, when you go in the 7th round, there's like some question marks, but like about the kind of how much of a leash you have to get that opportunity. Like we talked about Stribling earlier, you do think that if you go at the first pick of the 2nd round, there's a little bit more mistakes you can make before the team decides to cut ties with you. But when you're in the 7th round, those calls can come pretty quick. But I'm optimistic that he's in a pretty good spot there with the Steelers to get an opportunity.
And I the other one I like is Adam Randall. So I didn't know this until yesterday. So but Adam Randall was the pick of the owner of the Ravens.
Yeah, I read about that. Yeah.
So the owner of the Ravens basically negotiated this year with the GM and the coach and said, I want to make a draft pick this year and I want carte blanche on like who I draft. I'll do all the research, but effectively I'm going to take a guy.
Is this though when we're talking earlier about teams making smart decisions? Does this fall into that category?
Well, but so basically, Adam Randall was a running back,
wide receiver.
Clemson. Well, yeah, and wide receiver at Clemson, and he did a bit of both. And the thing,
but he's a wide receiver. He kind of switched to running back.
Switched to running back, and again, he kind of had to do what the team wanted him to do, and basically, the ownership turned around and said, what we're going to get you to do is, they did all the research. They spoke to Dabo and they phoned this guy up, and the owner phoned him up and made the pick and said, basically I spoke to Dabo and you're the most high character guy he's ever had, willing to put yourself first. Like when ownership are getting involved, making picks, that guy is going to get used because you do not want to be the guy who shuts out like your owner. And I think Adam Randall's going to be a really interesting one. It's quite a flimsy running back room behind him, or in front of him. I think, he's going to get opportunities. He's got great hands.
They like to run the ball a lot.
They love to run the ball a lot. Like, there's just something about this that just looks like it could be bigger than it really is. So for me, just keep an eye on Adam Randall. He's a good late round sleeper. I think for me, I'd be comfortable taking him in the 3rd round of rookie drafts. I think he's someone that could add some significant value, especially now reading that ownership made the pick.
And he does have he's quite has a pretty good athletic profile as well.
Great athletic profile.
Yeah, and then obviously when you're looking at this point as well, you're looking at running backs who can catch the ball. And he's somebody having transitioned from wide receiver that I think obviously hopefully if he's playing wide receiver he could catch the ball as well. But yeah, I think he could be interesting. But I'm always intrigued that the GM made the call.
Not the GM.
Or the owner. The owner made the call.
Yeah, you should go watch it. I think it's out there in the ether now. It's worth a watch. But yeah,
my favorite thing that I've learned in the last couple of days is that KC Concepcion. I'm sure you have seen this. Have you? That KC. Do you know what KC stands for yet?
Kevin.
Yeah, his name is Kevin Concepcion, but they have gone with KC because his father is also Kevin Concepcion, so it's been like his nickname. So it's like his name and then his surname. So
it's a shame he's not KCC Concepcion. Kevin can't catch Concepcion.
Oh, that's what you're going with. Yeah, I think he'll catch the ball pretty fine. He'll catch the ball pretty fine.
Do you think? Because
yeah. I know as well. It was more an off-season thing than a college thing, but the Jamar Chase can't catch the ball in preseason is still one of my favorite memories of all time. That
was fun.
The ball had a different colors of the ball.
He can't catch it because it doesn't have the stripe on it. That was my favorite.
That is one of the best I've ever had. Then he just becomes one of the best receivers.
But there is legitimate concerns on Concepcion and
Johnson. Oh, there is, yeah. But there's still, again, there's enough like green shoots and good stuff. I think that's the one knock on him, but I think there's a lot of positives on him as well.
Yeah. There is. I just realised we're an hour and a half in. So, Colm, we're gonna sign this one off. Why don't you tell all the great folks out there where they can find you, where they can interact with you, where they can find your podcast with Sean Siegel and everything else and all the good work you're doing.
You can find me on socials at Overtime Ireland, and fantasy content really all the time over on the Rotoviz airwaves. There's lots of other shows there as well. I'm involved in quite a few of them. There's a great team on rotoviz.com with articles covering all the prospects at the minute, all the off-season stuff. We cover pretty much everything. But yeah, podcast-wise, twice a week I do Rotoviz Overtime, and then as we build up to the season, I'll do some other shows with guests from around the industry as well. But definitely check that out if you want more fantasy content. Had 2 shows this week. I'm trying to think. I've recorded so many shows this week because I'm kind of bulk recording in advance. I mentioned that running back show, but we did talk this week reacting to the NFL draft. We kind of done some first round, looking at the players we had ranked in that first round. Then we did kind of rounds 2 through 4 as well on the second show of the week. So you can check that on the Rotoviz Overtime podcast feed. It's available on all the podcast players as well as Rotoviz YouTube channel.
Make sure you check that out. And Colm, I hope you're going to be at the Dublin draft as well. So
yes, we didn't even get to that. I will be up in Dublin for that as well. I did get over to the one in London a couple of years back, so it's pretty exciting to have one here in the Emerald Isle this year. I'm excited. I think this is either my 9th or 10th Scott Fish Bowl, so we've been representing it a while. I didn't think we'd get one over here in Ireland, so pretty awesome.
I can't wait. All 3 of us in the same room. Why don't you? There's still a few spots left, right, Danny? So if you want to draft with, I don't know if Colm and I will be in the same draft. We have been before though, but I don't know if we'll be in the same draft again. But if we're not, then you'll have an opportunity to draft with one of us. But we'll definitely have a drink.
Yeah, and there's because there's obviously a couple of draft rooms. There's some people from I have a home league up here that's been running for 15 years maybe. But there's a couple of guys in that who have signed up for the Scott Fish Bowl and got in as well. So I know that I'm drafting in one of the rooms with one of those guys. You could pick your slot. So I was like, I don't want to be next to you because we'll just hit each other for the whole night if we're picking back to back. But yeah, it's awesome to see again. When you're at something like that, there will be a feeling of community because the Scott Fish Bowl and everything that involves. And I think when you meet people in real life, it tends to be a much nicer experience than meeting them online. People are much nicer in general, but that should be pretty awesome. Yeah.
They're even nicer when you meet them outside of the Emirates Stadium, like we have done.
That was one of the craziest. We're walking around and there's 60,000 people, and I'm like, Murf? He's like, I know I kind of stand out for people who are watching this video. They mightn't realize it, but I'm 6'6", so I'm kind of like a tall. I've on a hat here, but I'm also very bald, shaved head. I stand out quite a bit probably when I'm walking around, but that was fun.
Yeah, that was funny. I was not used to getting called like that, but it was great. But Colm, thank you so much for coming on. I can't wait to see you. It's actually only a month away, just over a month away. So I'm looking forward to hanging out in person. Rush Nation, do sign up for that. Do get involved in everything that we're doing. We're going to be back next week with another guest, but we'll be on at Thursday next week for a quick change in pace. But until then, Rush Nation, don't forget, as always, keep rushing.
Hey everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.